My family gave the empire I built to my useless brother, so I took my secrets and watched it burn. The silence of the morning after was different. For the first time in a decade, it wasn't a void to be filled with work, with deadlines, with the incessant demands of others. It wasn't empty. It was full of possibility. My phone remained dark on the kitchen counter, a sleek black brick, a small monument to the decision I'd made. I had unplugged myself from their world, and in doing so, I felt like I could finally breathe. The first few days were an exercise in the art of disappearing. I became a tourist in my own city, a ghost haunting my own life. My feet, unburdened by the familiar rush, carried me through streets I'd only ever seen from the back of a taxi. I found a small, dusty bookstore in the West Village, the kind that smells of aging paper and forgotten stories, and spent an entire afternoon lost in its narrow aisles. I bought a novel, not a biography of some obscure artist, or a history of Rococo furniture, but a simple fictional story. It felt like an act of rebellion. My real sanctuary, though, was the modern, specifically its sculpture garden. It was a place I'd always kept for myself, a secret haven away from the gilded cage of Vance Legacy auctions. I'd walk the winding paths, the city's roar softened to a distant hum, and run my fingers over the cool, unyielding lines of bronze and marble. There was a Giacometti that always drew me in its figure, impossibly thin, yet rooted to the earth. It felt like I was touching something honest, something that couldn't be appraised or sold or leveraged. It didn't belong to my family. It didn't belong to the auction house. It was just there. And in its quiet presence I found a piece of my own solitude. But peace is a fickle thing. In the quiet moments, the past would rush in uninvited. The self-reflection was a tide I couldn't stop. I'd be sipping coffee, watching the world go by, and suddenly I'd be back under the harsh fluorescent lights of the office at 2 a.m., my eyes burning as I triple-checked the provenance of a minor Flemish painting. I'd remember the smirks of the old guard, the men my father had employed for decades, who looked at me, the woman who dragged their dusty institution into the 21st century, as if I were a child playing dress-up. They'd bristled at every idea I had, from digitizing the catalogs to pursuing contemporary Asian artists. "Let the girl have her fun," I once overheard one of them tell my father. "She'll learn how things are really done soon enough." And my father? That was the most painful echo. I remembered the pride in his eyes years ago, the way he'd pat my shoulder after I closed a deal no one thought possible. He called me his secret weapon. His words felt so real, then a validation I craved more than any commission. Now they just felt like a lie. A convenient story he told himself while paving the way for his son, the true heir. The chosen one. How had I not seen it? The way he'd started bringing Leo to strategy meetings, the way he'd brush off my concerns about Leo's disinterest. "He just needs time, Alara. He's family." The words now rang in my head with the hollow clang of betrayal. After a week of this self-imposed exile, I finally opened my laptop in that quiet bookstore cafe. I wasn't looking for trouble. I was just going to read the newsfeel connected to something other than my own thoughts. But muscle memory is a powerful thing. I saw the icon for my personal email, saw the little red circle with a number so high it was laughable. I clicked. It was a digital avalanche, hundreds of emails. Most were junk, but scattered among them were firecrackers of panic from the world I'd abandoned. Texts from my phone had been forwarded to my email. Messages from former colleagues, all variations of the same terrified plea. "Dana, where are you? We're drowning without you." One subject line from a young appraiser I'd mentored screamed in all caps, "Urgent client files, missing, call me." A grim, bitter satisfaction settled in my chest. So the chaos had begun. They were finally feeling the weight of what I'd always carried alone. I closed the laptop. It wasn't my problem anymore. Or so I thought. A few more days passed. The initial thrill of freedom had settled into a steady, quiet calm. I finally decided to turn my phone back on, not to engage, but simply to exist in the modern world again. The moment it flickered to life, it shuddered, vibrating nonstop for a full minute as a backlog of notifications flooded in. Missed calls from my father, dozens of them, panicked texts from Leo, and one voicemail from my mother. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the play button. I knew what it would be, I braced myself and pressed play. Her voice filled the silence of my apartment, a sound so carefully constructed it made my teeth ache. That syrupy voice, the one she used for damage control, was in full effect. "Ilara, honey," it began, oozing a false, gentle concern. "We're all so worried about you. We're having a family dinner on Sunday. Just a little talk, about what happened. About how we can all work together." I almost laughed out loud. Work together. As if we were a team. I wanted to delete it, to throw the phone against the wall, but something in her voice, a faint tremor of desperation beneath the sugary surface, made me pause. This wasn't just an invitation home. This was a summons. She was trying to pull me back into the game, into the endless cycle of family manipulation, of compromise and control that I had just escaped. Still, a dark, morbid curiosity got the better of me. Part of me wanted to see their faces. I wanted to look them in the eye and see if they truly understood the magnitude of what they had done. I wanted to see the cracks in their perfect facade up close. I picked up the phone, my fingers moving with a newfound certainty. I opened a new text message to her. My reply was clipped sharp and contained only a single word. "Fine." I hit send. I knew this wasn't an invitation to a family dinner. It was a summons to the first battle of a war I was finally ready to fight. The drive up to the family estate in Westchester was familiar enough to be painful. Every curve in the road, every ancient oak tree lining the long driveway was etched into my memory. But tonight, I wasn't the daughter coming home. I was a general entering enemy territory, my mind clear and my objective singular. I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. I wasn't going to a family dinner. I was attending a summit I had called, and they just didn't know it yet. The house was lit up like a museum piece, just as I knew it would be. Warm, golden lights spilled from every window, a carefully orchestrated performance of warmth and harmony. It was my mother's signature touch, perfect on the outside, no matter how much was crumbling within. The facade was everything. Leo greeted me at the door, his posture radiating a forced, breezy confidence. He wore a stupidly expensive blazer, probably bought the day after the announcement. "Ilara," he said, that half smirk he'd been practicing since high school plastered on his face. "Glad you could make it." He leaned in, aiming for a kiss on the cheek, a gesture of familial affection that was utterly grotesque under the circumstances. I took a half step back, my body moving, before my mind had even registered the command. The space between us felt like a chasm. "Save it, Leo," I said, my voice quiet, but carrying the chill of a winter morning. His smile flickered, the edges twitching for a fraction of a second before he regained his composure. He didn't push it. Smart boy. Inside, the scene was exactly as I'd pictured. My parents were waiting in the grand dining room, the long mahogany table set with my mother's best china and silver that gleamed under the light of a crystal chandelier. A table set for war. My father, Richard, gave me a curt nod, his face a mask of unreadable stoicism. My mother, Catherine, offered a smile so tight I thought her lips might crack. "Darling," she cooed, her voice like honey laced with arsenic. "We're so glad you're here." It felt like being welcomed into a play I had never agreed to be in. I sat down, the silence from my end of the table, a stark contrast to their immediate flurry of small talk. Weather, a neighbor's new car, anything but the gaping wound in the center of the room. I let them talk. I was an analyst, after all. And this was my final, most crucial analysis. I watched them cataloging every tell, the way my mother's fingers nervously pleated her napkin, the way my father's jaw was clenched just a little too tightly. And Leo. Oh, Leo. He launched into a monologue about the new direction he envisioned for Vance Legacy auctions. He dropped names of galleries in Berlin he'd had preliminary chats with, and used buzzwords like synergy and disrupting the space with all the conviction of a man reading from a script he hadn't memorized. I just watched him. I saw the way his hands gestured too broadly when he was bluffing, the way his eyes darted to our father for approval after every other sentence. He wasn't selling a vision. He was selling a lie he hadn't even fully convinced himself of yet. Finally, I'd had enough of the performance. I placed my fork down on the plate with a soft click that seemed to echo in the tense silence. "Let's stop pretending," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the small talk like a shard of glass. 3 pairs of eyes snapped to me. "Why did you do it?" My father set down his own fork, his movements slow and deliberate. He looked at me not as a daughter, but as a mildly interesting business problem. We felt Leo had a fresh vision of Lara, he said, his tone infuriatingly calm. He has a knack for connecting with the younger modern buyers. You're so focused on the old masters, on the past. The past. The words hung in the air, dripping with condescension. I felt a surge of white-hot anger, but I channeled it into ice. The past is what's paying for this house, Father. The past is what's selling. In fact, I just closed the biggest estate acquisition this auction house has seen in a decade. I let that sink in before delivering the killing blow. And you handed the keys to a man whose last great business venture was a cocktail recipe blog. Leo snorted a nervous, high-pitched sound. You're always so dramatic, Alara. It's not like you're irreplaceable. I slowly raised an eyebrow, pinning him with a look. Really? I let the word hang in the air for a long, uncomfortable moment. The power shift was a palpable thing, a change in the room's atmospheric pressure. I could feel it moving, coalescing around me. Then can you explain why our biggest collector, Mr. Allister, just pulled his entire collection from the spring auction, all of it? I leaned forward slightly. That's a 4.8 million loss in potential bids. Gone. The words dropped onto the table like stones into a still pond. The effect was immediate and devastating. Leo's face went completely white, the blood draining from it so fast he looked like a marble statue. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her fork clattering against her plate. My father's mask of composure finally shattered. His jaw went slack, and for the first time all night he looked truly lost. No one said a word. The silence was my victory lap. I leaned back in my chair, the plush velvet, a comforting presence at my back. I built this company's reputation. I said, my voice even and clear. I turned it from a dusty family relic into something real, something respected. You don't get to erase that, because Leo finally learned how to pronounce Basquiat. My mother found her voice first tight and strained. Dana, we can't keep fighting like this. We're a family. We need to find a way forward. I let out a short, mirthless laugh. I looked around the table at their shocked faces, the forced smiles gone, the tension crackling like static in the air. A family, I said. This isn't a family. This is a business that only remembers my name when the balance sheet is in the red. No one answered. The truth of it was too stark to deny. So I pushed back my chair, the legs scraping against the floor. I stood up tall and straight. I'm not doing this anymore, I said, my voice ringing with finality. I am not your fallback plan. I am not your silent partner who cleans up the messes. I am done being the one who fixes everything while you all pretend the prodigal son is some kind of genius. I looked directly at my brother, who was now staring intently at his plate, as if it held the secrets to the universe. If you ever want me to come back, it won't be as your quiet little helper. It will be on my terms exclusively. My mother reached a hand out toward me, a desperate pleading gesture. Darling, don't. I cut her off, my voice soft but unyielding. I took a step back out of her reach. You've already made your choice. I turned and walked out of that room, my heels clicking a sharp, defiant rhythm on the marble floor. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was leaving something behind. I felt like I was finally stepping into who I was meant to be. As I settled into the driver's seat of my car, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a profound sense of release. I hadn't cried. I hadn't shouted. I had simply stated the facts. As I was about to start the engine, my phone, lying silent on the passenger seat, buzzed once. It wasn't a call from my father, or a pleading text from my mother. It was a new message from a number I recognized instantly. Clara, my old protégé. The message was short, a lifeline I hadn't even known I needed. Heard there was a shakeup, it read. Don't do anything rash. Call me. Back in the quiet sanctuary of my apartment, I ignored the flood of increasingly desperate messages lighting up my phone's lock screen. They were a frantic chorus of panic from a world that no longer felt like mine. My focus was on a different message, the one from Clara. That single line of text was a beacon in the storm, a lifeline I hadn't even known I was looking for. A small, genuine smile touched my lips. But I didn't call her back. Not yet. Before I explored any new paths, I had to meticulously map out the one I had just left. I had to quantify the invaluable. I opened my laptop, the cool glow of the screen illuminating my determined face in the dim light of my living room. For the next 2 days, I worked with a focus I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't about updating a resume, it was about forging an arsenal. I was building my portfolio, and it was the most important piece I had ever curated. It wasn't a list of sales figures and career highlights, it was a testament. Page by page, I compiled the evidence of my life's work, the intangible assets that had no line item on a balance sheet, but were the true foundation of Vance Legacy auctions. I documented the resurrection of the dead Renaissance tapestry deal, detailing the complex three-way negotiation I had orchestrated when everyone else, including my father, had told me to walk away. I included scanned copies of the handwritten notes I'd received from reclusive artists, the ones who had sworn they'd never work with a commercial auction house until I had spent months building their trust, understanding their vision, and assuring them their work wouldn't just be sold but honored. I created a section dedicated to my collectors, not just their names, but their souls. My private notes detailed the quirks of a notoriously difficult Swiss billionaire, including his secret passion for 18th century porcelain, and the fact that he only responded to correspondence written on cream-colored stationery. I laid out the psychological profile of the widowed heiress from Palm Beach, explaining how I'd secured her collection, not by talking about returns on investment, but by listening to the stories behind each piece her late husband had acquired. This was my intellectual property. This was the magic they thought happened on its own. It wasn't a CV. It was an indictment of their blindness. It wasn't for them. It was for me. With my arsenal complete, I finally called Clara. We met at a chic minimalist cafe in Soho, a world of polished concrete and blonde wood that was a universe away from my family's stuffy, gilded estate. Clara, ever the pragmatist, was already there, a cup of espresso sitting untouched in front of her. She was sharp, direct, and her eyes held a look of profound respect that I realized I had been starved for. "I'm not going to waste your time with small talk, Alara," she said, her voice low and direct. "We both know what you are capable of. The entire industry is buzzing. Vance Legacy is in freefall without you." She slid a sleek, leather-bound folder across the table. "This is a formal offer from the board at Sterling & Crown." I opened it. The rival offer was everything I hadn't even allowed myself to dream of. It wasn't just a job. It was a throne. Senior partner. A significant equity stake that would make me one of the key shareholders. Complete autonomy over the Impressionist and Modern Art department. The numbers on the page were staggering, but it was the title and the terms that took my breath away. It was validation in its purest, most potent form. "They don't know what they lost," Alara Clara continued, her gaze unwavering. "Your father sees a daughter. Leo sees a competitor. At Sterling & Crown, we see the most formidable talent in this city, and we want you on our team. We want you to help us build an empire, not just maintain one." A wave of emotion washed over me, so powerful it almost knocked the air from my lungs. It wasn't just relief. It was the profound, earth-shattering feeling of being seen. Truly seen for exactly who I was and what I could do. For years I had been fighting for scraps of approval from my own family, and here our biggest competitor was laying a kingdom at my feet. The negotiating power I now held was immense. It was a weapon with two edges. I could either return to Vance Legacy as its undisputed savior, or I could join Sterling & Crown and become the architect of its demise. "Thank you, Clara," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor I felt inside. I closed the folder. "This is very generous. I need some time to think about it." She simply nodded, a knowing smile on her face. "Take all the time you need. An asset like you is worth waiting for." Walking out of that cafe, I felt a new kind of power humming in my veins. It wasn't the frantic energy of anger or the hollow pride of revenge. It was the calm, centered confidence of a woman who knew her worth and held all the cards. The desperate, pleading texts that continued to flood in from my family now seemed like a pathetic background noise, the whining of children who had broken their favorite toy. That evening, as I was looking over the Sterling & Crown offer for the 10th time, my phone pinged with a new message from my mother. It wasn't a text this time. It was a picture. A plate of homemade empanadas, golden and flaky, the kind she used to make for me after a particularly hard week at college. The caption read, "Thinking of you, honey. Please come home. We need to talk." I stared at the photo. A year ago, this blatant act of emotional manipulation might have worked. It would have pulled at my heartstrings, activated that deeply ingrained sense of daughterly duty. But now, after the board of Sterling and Crown had valued me in the millions, after Clara had looked at me like I was a legend in the making, the empanadas looked so small, so weak. I looked from the picture on my phone to the formal offer on my laptop screen. One was a cage disguised as comfort. The other was a key to a new universe. And in that moment, I knew with absolute clarity what I had to do. This was no longer about escaping. It was about conquering. I wasn't going to run to Sterling and Crown, not yet. First, I was going to give my family one last chance to value the invaluable, on my terms. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over my mother's name. My heart was calm, my mind was sharp. I was no longer the daughter begging for a seat at the table. I was the one who owned the entire room. I pressed the call button, ready to set the stage for my final negotiation. When I called my mother, her voice was a mixture of relief and apprehension. I cut through her attempts at emotional preamble with the cool precision of a scalpel. "I will meet," I said, "but not at the house. And it won't be a family chat. It will be a business meeting." I gave her the time and the address of a private gallery in Chelsea. The silence on the other end of the line was her acquiescence. I chose the venue deliberately. The gallery was a stark cathedral-like space with whitewashed walls and floors of polished gray concrete. On the walls hung massive abstract canvases, bold, challenging, and worth a fortune. It was a place where value was debated and defined with ruthless clarity. It was neutral ground, but it was also my ground. Every brushstroke, every shadow was meticulously curated, a silent testament to the world I mastered, while they played at business. I was there first, seated at a long steel table in the center of the main room, calm and composed. I wasn't the daughter summoned for a lecture. I was the power broker setting the terms of a critical negotiation. They arrived together, a united front that looked anything but. My father's face was a controlled mask, but the slight flush high on his cheekbones betrayed the stress he was trying to hide. My mother looked tired, her hands clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. And Leo was a wreck. He was pale, his eyes were jumpy, and his expensive suit couldn't hide the nervous energy vibrating off him. His knee bounced incessantly under the table. They looked like a delegation coming to sue for peace, and they were walking onto my battlefield. I didn't offer them a drink. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. The moment they were seated, I slid a single crisp sheet of paper across the vast expanse of the steel table. It came to a stop directly in front of my father. 1 page. That's all it took to define the price of their legacy. My father picked it up. Leo leaned over his shoulder, his eyes widening as he read. "This is..." Leo started, his voice a choked whisper. He looked up at me, incredulous. "This is a joke." I kept my gaze fixed on my father, ignoring my brother completely. "Read the terms, Leo?" I said, my voice dangerously calm. His eyes darted back to the page. I could almost hear him reading the points that were causing his world to tilt on its axis. 35% equity in Vance Legacy Auctions. The position of co-directorship with full and final authority on all operational matters and acquisitions. Veto power. And the final insult, his own new title, Head of Media and Celebrity Relations, a figurehead role designed to keep him busy with parties and press releases, far away from the actual business of art. "This is insane," he finally exploded, slapping the table. "You can't just come in here and demand..." "This is non-negotiable." I cut him off, my voice slicing through his tantrum. It was quiet, but it had the finality of a gavel striking wood. My father's head snapped up. "Alara..." But I wasn't looking at him. I was looking at my brother. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the gallery's climate control system. Leo's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. His outrage sputtered and died, replaced by something else, something raw and ugly: defeat. Finally, he slumped back in his chair, the fight draining out of him in one great shuddering exhalation. He rubbed a hand vigorously over his face, as if trying to wipe away the last few weeks. "I can't," he said, his voice so low it was barely audible. "I can't do it, Alara." He wouldn't look at me, his gaze fixed on his trembling hands on the table. "It's too much. I thought I could handle it, but I'm drowning. Every day it's something new. A contract I don't understand, a collector I've offended. I'm drowning." It was the first honest thing he had said to me in months. The first moment of genuine vulnerability, and I felt Nothing. No flash of anger, no surge of triumph. Just a quiet, hollow pity. He wasn't built for this. He never had been. They had thrown him into the deep end of the ocean, and now they were shocked he couldn't swim. My mother, sensing his collapse, reached out and placed her hand on his arm. "Leo, it's okay," she said softly, though her eyes were on me. "You've done your best." He just nodded his shoulders, slumping even further. The surrender was absolute. My father cleared his throat, drawing my attention. I could practically see the gears turning in his head, weighing the cost of his pride against the imminent cost of letting the company he'd inherited bleed out completely. His jaw was tight, his lips a thin, hard line. This was the hardest deal he would ever have to close. "Alara," he said, his voice stiff, each word forced out as if it physically pained him. We always knew you were the heart of this business." He paused, gathering himself. Perhaps it's time we recognized that, formally." It wasn't an apology. I knew I would never get one. But it was an admission, a concession. It was enough. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the man who had once told me I was too idealistic to lead, now admitting in his own constricted way that he'd been wrong, that I had been right all along. "Good," I said, my voice as crisp and clear as the document sitting between us. "Then we're in agreement." Leo let out another sigh, this one of pure relief, and slumped deeper into his chair. "I'll step aside operationally," he mumbled. "Let me handle the social side. The events, the press. That's more my speed." He glanced at me, his eyes full of a weary resignation, as if bracing for another blow. I just nodded once. "That's fine. Just stay out of the business of art." My father exhaled a slow, controlled breath, and I saw some of the tension leave his shoulders. "Then it's settled," he said, though it sounded more like a capitulation than a celebration. I gathered my purse and my single sheet of paper and stood up. The meeting was over. "I'll have my lawyer draft the final agreement," I announced. "Once it's signed, I will begin work on a recovery plan for the fourth quarter." I paused at the head of the table, letting my gaze sweep over each of them. One last time, my broken brother, my weary mother, my defeated father. "But let's be clear," I said, my voice leaving no room for misunderstanding. "This isn't me coming home as the dutiful daughter. This is me taking my rightful place." My mother managed a small, tired smile. "We know Alara," she said, "and we're grateful." I gave a tight final nod and turned to leave. As I walked out of the gallery and into the crisp evening air, I felt the immense weight of years of quiet compromises, of biting my tongue, of proving my worth over and over again, finally lifting from my shoulders. For the first time, I wasn't just fighting for a seat at the table. I was claiming the damn thing, and they all knew it. 2 months later, I stood on the balcony of my apartment, a glass of bold red wine in my hand, watching the city lights sprawl out before me like a river of fallen stars. The chaos of the past few months felt like a distant storm, a memory from someone else's life. The rhythm of Vance Legacy auctions was steady again, a strong, confident heartbeat that I had personally restarted. The legacy was restored. That morning, we had finalized an $8.6 million estate sale for a prominent East Coast family, a new record for the auction house. But the triumph wasn't just in the numbers, though the numbers were certainly good. It was in the quiet confidence that had returned to the halls, the renewed trust I saw in the eyes of our collectors and dealers. They had come back not out of habit, but because they believed in the name again. They believed in me. The family dynamic had shifted too, settling into a new, healthier equilibrium built on a foundation of respect I had demanded. My mother had called earlier that day. Dinner on Sunday, she'd asked, her voice warm, and for the first time free of any manipulative undertones. No business talk, just family. I'd hesitated for only a second, the old reflex of bracing for a catch, before I realized there wasn't one. I wasn't their fallback plan anymore, or the silent workhorse to be summoned when things went wrong. I was the co-director, the partner, the reason the ship was still afloat. They wanted me there, not because they needed me to fix something, but because I was part of the foundation. And Leo surprisingly was flourishing. Freed from the crushing weight of a role he was never meant for, he had taken to his PR duties with a natural flair. He was charming, he was great with the media, and he loved the spotlight of a gala opening. He was in his element, and for the first time, I didn't feel resentment towards him. I just felt a distant sense of rightness, of a piece finally clicking into its proper place. Later that evening, after a long but productive day, I walked through the main showroom one last time before heading home. The vast space was silent, the priceless art on the walls, standing like quiet sentinels in the dim light. This was a different kind of silence from the one I had sought in my days of self-imposed exile. That had been the silence of escape. This was the silence of power. It was the calm at the center of the world I commanded. I paused in front of a delicate bronze sculpture, one I had championed when no one else saw its potential, and ran my hand over its cool, smooth surface. For so many years, I had felt like I was clawing for a seat at a table that was never truly meant for me. I thought of the insecure girl who used to work until dawn, reworking catalogs and second-guessing every decision, all in the desperate hope of earning a nod of approval. She had built this empire, but she had been afraid of her own voice. I wasn't her anymore. Standing there in the quiet hush of the gallery, I realized I was no longer fighting for a seat at the table. I was the table. I was the foundation. I was the reason it all held together. My name was on the door not as a dutiful daughter or a caretaker, but as a leader in my rightful place. And I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that I would never let myself slip back into that silent secondary role again. This earned power was mine, and I had learned exactly how to use its voice.